Imagine being accused of poisoning your own child, locked away in prison while pregnant with another baby, only to discover years later that what appeared to be an inexplicable crime was actually a tragic medical error that destroyed multiple lives. This is exactly what happened to a young mother in Missouri, in what became one of the most shocking cases of wrongful conviction in American history. If you're a fan of dark and mysterious stories, then you've come to the right place. Make sure to follow this channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our uploads. In July 1989, Patricia Stallings and her husband David were living what seemed to be an ordinary life in Jefferson County, Missouri. Their story had begun just a few years earlier, when Patricia was working as a convenience store clerk in the mid-1980s. David was a regular customer, and in 1986 they started dating. They married in 1988, and soon after, Patricia became pregnant with their first child. At just 24 years old, she was now adapting to life as a mother to their 5-month-old son Ryan, who had suffered from chronic gastric distress since birth. But on July 9th, their world would be turned upside down by a simple wrong turn off the freeway. That morning, Ryan's condition had suddenly deteriorated. His breathing became extremely labored, and he was vomiting uncontrollably. Patricia rushed him to what she thought would be St. Louis Children's Hospital, but in her panic, she turned off the freeway too early and ended up at Cardinal Glennon Hospital instead. This accidental detour would set in motion a chain of events that would destroy her family. Ryan was immediately placed in the pediatric intensive care unit, hooked up to a respirator with various tubes attached to his tiny body. By this point, he was almost comatose. Patricia and David rented a room at the hospital to stay close to their son, while doctors ran a complete medical examination, including blood and urine tests. After 3 agonizing days, they received stunning news. The lab tests, using a gas chromatography machine, showed ethylene glycol, the main ingredient in antifreeze, in Ryan's blood. The doctors were polite, but suspicious. From that moment on, Patricia and David weren't allowed to see their son alone. At least 2 nurses or a doctor had to be present at all times. After 12 days in the hospital, Ryan recovered, but he wasn't returned to his parents. Instead, a social worker took custody of him, explaining it was policy when poisoning was suspected. Patricia and David were allowed only 1-hour visits each Thursday. For 5 weeks, they cherished these brief moments with their son. But then came August 31st during their 6th visit. Patricia was briefly left alone with Ryan. 3 days later, he suffered another severe attack and was rushed back to the hospital. Once again, tests showed ethylene glycol in his blood, this time at even higher levels. The next day, Patricia was arrested. While she sat in jail, Ryan's condition worsened. On September 7th, doctors asked David to make an impossible decision, to remove his son from life support. For 3 hours, David held his baby boy as he slowly slipped away. Ryan was not yet 6 months old. The charge against Patricia was upgraded to first-degree murder. While in jail, she discovered she was pregnant with their second child. On February 27, 1990, she gave birth to David Jr., known as DJ, who was immediately taken into state custody despite David Sr. never being suspected of any wrongdoing. This devastating blow would ultimately prove to be their salvation. When DJ was just 2 weeks old, he began showing identical symptoms to those that had killed his brother. He was rushed to St. Louis Children's Hospital, where doctors diagnosed him with a rare genetic disorder called methylmalonic acidemia, or MMA. This condition inhibits the body's ability to process proteins and causes the body to produce chemical byproducts remarkably similar to ethylene glycol. But prosecutors pressed forward. In January 1991, Patricia's trial began. The evidence seemed overwhelming. 2 separate labs had identified ethylene glycol in Ryan's blood, and calcium oxalate crystals were found in his brain. The jury deliberated for 10 hours before finding Patricia guilty of first-degree murder. Patricia was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Her new attorneys, led by Robert Ritter, petitioned the court for another trial based on ineffective previous counsel. In a surprising turn of events, even prosecutor McElroy agreed that her original defense had been inadequate. This admission was extraordinary, a prosecutor acknowledging that the person they had just convicted deserved another chance at justice. When the verdict was read, David collapsed from shock and had to be rushed to the hospital. Then came the breakthrough that would change everything. The case was featured on NBC's Unsolved Mysteries in May 1991. The show contacted Dr. Steven Cederbaum, an independent medical geneticist, who explained that it would be very simple to confuse MMA with poisoning because the symptoms are so similar. He noted that these disorders are so rare that most doctors have never seen a case, or if they have, they didn't recognize it. The episode caught the attention of Dr. William Sly, chairman of the biochemistry department at St. Louis University, who saw it and was troubled by the evidence. Working with Dr. James Shoemaker, they tested frozen samples of Ryan's blood and found something shocking. It wasn't ethylene glycol at all, but propionic acid, a substance normally found in patients with MMA. The difference between the two compounds was just a few carbon atoms. To prove their point, they sent test samples of blood containing propionic acid to 7 different labs. 3 of them incorrectly identified it as ethylene glycol, exactly the same mistake that had condemned Patricia. Even more startling, scientists discovered that some of the ethylene glycol traces in the original tests had been caused by the sterilization process used to draw blood, while others came from the process of washing Ryan's bottle. The crystals found in his brain weren't from poison at all. They were caused by an ethanol drip given to him after the suspected poisoning. Yale genetics professor Dr. Piero Rinaldo spent weeks reviewing the evidence and found major errors in both sets of lab findings. He confirmed Ryan had died from MMA, not poisoning. On September 20, 1991, at a press conference in St. Louis, all charges against Patricia were dropped. The prosecutor personally apologized for their ordeal. Patricia and David sued Cardinal Glennon Hospital, St. Louis University Hospital, the doctors, and SmithKline Clinical Laboratories for their roles in the incorrect diagnosis. Their lawsuit specifically cited the hospital's refusal to perform additional testing, even after DJ was diagnosed with MMA. By 1992, Cardinal Glennon, St. Louis University, and the doctors had settled out of court. In 1993, they reached a settlement with SmithKline, bringing the total compensation to several $1 million. The case gained such prominence that in 1993, CBS produced a movie called Without a Kiss Goodbye, based on their story. It served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of rushing to judgment in medical cases. The Missouri legal community began using the case as a crucial example in training sessions about the importance of thorough medical investigation. But no amount of money or attention could make up for what they'd lost. The years that followed brought both healing and heartbreak. Patricia and David eventually divorced. DJ lived with the challenges of MMA for 23 years before passing away on September 17, 2013. David Sr. passed away on April 30, 2019, at the age of 57 after a lengthy illness, survived by 4 other children and a grandson. The tragic irony of this case is that if the proper genetic testing had been available, or if medical professionals had considered alternative explanations for Ryan's symptoms, he might have received the treatment he needed and survived. Instead, a grieving mother was wrongly accused of murdering her own child, while her son's real killer, a rare genetic disorder, went undetected until it was too late. Today, genetic testing for conditions like MMA is standard practice in many hospitals, and the accuracy of toxicology screening has greatly improved. But for Patricia Stallings and her family, these advances came too late. Their story stands as a testament to the importance of presuming innocence and the devastating consequences that can occur when we jump to conclusions without considering all possibilities. If you found this story interesting, make sure to like this video and check out some of the other true crime cases on our channel. But before you move on to another video, let us know in the comments below. What do you think about this case? Have you ever heard of similar instances where rare medical conditions were mistaken for something more sinister? Remember, sometimes the truth is stranger than any fiction we could imagine, and the most obvious explanation isn't always the correct one.